Good morning from the second age of reason. Just sitting here on the bridge over the river. I'm going to talk about a few items on recent decisions by the Supreme Court. Because it seems like for the longest time they were quiet. You'd heard nothing from them. And then suddenly a trickle and all kind of decisions. So it's like they just have sort of like bursts of activity. And some people seem a bit confused at their decrees because it seems sometimes to be auto-opposites. They're saying things that seem to be opposite of what you would expect. So I don't think they're opposite at all. I think they're just taken in the wrong context. You have to look at them in a certain context, and then they're totally consistent. For instance, they had a recent decree saying that random or strip searches for the slightest infraction are totally justified, which I think is not so, because searches and seizures and things should be based on search warrants and probable cause and going through proper channels. But apparently they don't necessarily take agreement with that. Why? Because I think they're in support of the police state prison complex that probably is responsible for a lot of money coming into the government in terms of some things, and also in terms of a lot of business going to the prison industrial complex. So the idea that you could have more searches and maybe turn up more stuff and more reasons to incarcerate people, I think that's a consistent position in terms of a overly conservative police state totalitarian government. The next decision would be, there was a case brought regarding Milwaukee police, that they had been fudging police reports. So there was a thing to file for Freedom of Information Act to obtain those documents. So far, so good. Except that the police said that they wanted to have some large amount of money for every document, which would have probably amounted to millions of dollars to obtain these documents. The Supreme Court says, well, no, you have to offer those pieces of evidence at a reasonable price. Again, because the reports you're talking about tended to make the complaints or charges much less than they should have been. Coming out with the real documents would prove that there were a lot more serious crimes, resulting in much more business for the prison industrial complex in terms of more prisoners and longer sentences. Secondly, immigration law. They struck down some of it, but not all of it. But they still can do pretty much stopping and asking for papers, which is completely consistent, again, with a totalitarian police state. And but they don't really want to totally turn off the illegal aliens, because I know a lot of the conservatives in this totalitarian state like to have their cheap labor. So that's why it kind of half went through. Secondly, there was a decision by the Supreme Court that you cannot put children on life sentences without any chance of parole. Now, they didn't come out and say you couldn't put children on life sentences. They just meant that you couldn't put them on life sentences without parole. So they could still get a chance of parole, but nobody says you have to grant them parole. So the net effect is no different. You still have a continuous flow of children to be able to come into the prison industrial complex. And they like children because they are not so expensive to feed or to care for medicine-wise. So that would give them a long line of profit, continuous flow of money for maintaining those children. So that's why they only went that far with the law. And then, of course, there was the Montana campaign contribution law, where they, again, did a Citizens United and said, money is free speech, and therefore you cannot limit money coming into campaigns for elections. And so that simply keeps the elected officials bought and paid for, just as the executives and the judicial are bought and paid for. Although I don't see the monetary motivation so much with the judicial, because they get lifetime appointments, great benefits, and a great retirement plan. I don't know how they stand to profit from it as much, unless of course they are coerced in some way. And then lastly is the health care reform, which is not health care reform at all. It's health finance legislation to make sure that everybody buys private insurance. So this is also in terms of the conservative idea of collecting money. The one judge that may have been against it changed his mind at the last minute. I wonder if he had a sudden enlightenment, somebody talked to him, or what, saying, wait a minute, the health insurance law was written by insurance companies. It was written, and they know how to make it profitable. So they told him, just shut up and support it. And he did, and it's supported. But there's nothing in the law to limit the premiums. There's nothing in the law that says that the insurance has to pay benefits. There's nothing in the law that limits the patient's liability. There's nothing in the law that controls the cost from the providers. There's nothing in the law about that. So it doesn't touch clinical practice at all. So it's not a health care law. It's a finance law. It's all about cost. It's all about money. Which is why, in the end, the Supreme Court ended up supporting it. Because right now, the Supreme Court is totally controlled by the moneyed interests, by the top 1%. So I thought I'd give you that clarification, because to me right now, I look at all those decisions and I see no conflicts. I see no disparity. It's all consistent, completely. And that is probably why the Supreme Court of the United States is losing credibility, if it hasn't lost it totally already. They no longer represent us, the people. They represent the money, the power. That's what they represent, in my humble opinion. So until later, we'll be seeing